Hello, everybody. Welcome back. And it is hard to believe that we are winding down the first ever Appsilon Shiny Conference. And I just want to say before we get going here, it has totally exceeded my expectations. And we're about to go out on a real high note here with our keynote question and answer panel. So let's get right to introducing our very talented panel here. First, starting with Joe Cheng. Joe Chang is the CTO of RStudio. Joe is many things, but he is a software engineer who has worked with a number of startups before joining RStudio. And he is the creator of the RStudio IDE alongside JJ Allaire, as well as, of course, the creator of the Shiny package itself that we have all been talking about all the conference so far. So welcome, Joe. Hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here.
Great. And up next, we have Winston Chang. Winston Chang is a software engineer at RStudio who is now currently leading the Shiny development team. Winston holds a PhD in psychology from Northwestern University. And outside of Shiny, he is also the author of one of my favorite books that I've had for many years, the R Graphics Cookbook, which I still look to this day. So, Winston, glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us. Having me, I guess.
And last but certainly not least, we have Filip Stachura, who of course is the CEO and co-founder of Appsilon. Filip previously worked at Microsoft and has a double degree in applied mathematics and computer science at the University of Warsaw. Filip bootstrapped Appsilon from 0 to over 70 people and certainly has had a lot of growth over these years. He started his journey with open source contributions, a company, I should say, with Shiny.Symantec, Shiny.Router, and in his current role, he supports Data for Good efforts and the Appsilon lab developments, including the Rhino package we just heard about earlier, Shiny.React, and others. Welcome to the team here, Filip.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here.
All right. Yeah, it's great to have you all here. I always enjoy talking about Shiny as no mystery to anybody. And we got a lot of great questions that have been submitted by all of you watching on our Slido. So we're going to kind of hop right to it. I do see some common themes throughout them, but let's kick this off. And the first question I want to bring up is, what are some of the missing features in Shiny that the community should help support and work on in order to increase the adoption and reach of Shiny across industries? Who wants to take that one?
That's a tricky one.
We don't start easy here, you know
that. It's a little hard for me, and I'm guessing Winston, to answer, because the things that we feel like are glaring holes in Shiny, we usually look to our team to fill them out, especially when they involve changes that are more core to Shiny itself. But I will say, the community has constantly been a source of inspiration for us as they tackle their own felt needs, and it sort of shines a light on areas where we maybe didn't even realize we were lacking. So I think Shiny Feedback is an example of this. Oh my gosh, his name escapes me right now. That's so embarrassing. The Shiny Feedback package by, anyway, that led to the creation of Shiny Validate, because seeing that package, really seeing it in action made it so clear, like, oh, of course Shiny needs this. So I think the best thing that people in the Shiny community can do is solve their own problems. And as other people sort of resonate with those problems, then it sort of pops up onto our radar, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I did a quick Googling while you were talking. That is Andy Merlona's package, Shiny Feedback. We will put a link in the chat for everybody to look at. Yep.
I'm sure that's not the last time that's going to happen in the next hour.
Well, we're a team here. We always pick each other up.
Yeah, and I just want to, I think Joe's right about that. It's hard for us to have, like, oh, here's something that's good for the community to do, to have that sort of perspective, because we're so much on the inside. I mean, there's stuff that we want to do, and things that we think should be done, but that are core in Shiny. And that would be very difficult for somebody who's outside and doesn't have like a really deep knowledge of the code base to work on. So, and I'll just mention these really quick, like better debugging tools. I think that's, that's something that we've heard about before that people want. And also to make it easier to do, to create nice user interfaces. And that's something that's not as core to Shiny itself, but those are some things that could use some work.
Yeah, I was actually commenting after the last kind of workshop we just had that there is a wealth of Shiny related packages just dedicated to UI alone. And this was certainly not the case when Shiny first came out. So we are seeing, like you said, Joe and Winston, the community is rallying around certain things. And certainly, in my opinion, there are still areas that we can tackle well. Debugging has certainly been one of the hardest parts of my Shiny experience. I'm also very interested, and again, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, making sure it is easy as possible for those that finally got to the stage of building a production application, getting it into the hands and the right places for users to interact with. And, let's not kid ourselves. RStudio Connect is a great way to do that. There are also emerging solutions with using the latest in the software DevOps communities like Kubernetes and containerization. I'm hoping that these become front and center technologies as well.
I'd love to hear Filip's take on this as well. I know your company has done some really great additions to Shiny that I think sort of hit square in the middle of things that we've been missing in the past.
Yeah, so I think when we want to answer this question, that there are two answers. So one is what contributions should be made to the core, like the framework, and I think we've already seen a lot of improvement, great features that that the community with apps being more mature required, like modules or better support for asynchronous computations and stuff like that. So these are things that were required in the core, but there are, I think, other opportunities within the ecosystem which shouldn't be part of the core, and only some of the developers will require. And here, I think some examples that I feel, and maybe these packages already exist. Like, it's very hard to be on track with everything happening right now. But for example, something that would allow us to have better user experience whenever there is a problem within the app. So how the app behaves, how the developer is notified about the problem. So it is close to what Winston mentioned about debugging. So yeah, but it's also close to the UX part. It's very hard to create an application that is completely bulletproof. So and when it's in production, red text in the middle of the screen is not necessarily what we want. And there are some tools already within Shiny to handle that more gently, but they are not very often used. So maybe packages that will help to make this experience better for the end users and for the developers as well. And I think performance is another thing where we see a lot of apps taking a lot of time to compute something, and this can be very unpleasant for the end users. So thinking about how we build faster Shiny apps and how we make waiting even better for the users. And again, some packages already exist. So there are alternatives that are out there, but we probably can innovate even more in space. And last but not least, I think contributing to existing packages is not a bad idea. So a lot of packages out there, they do not get enough time. It's very hard to maintain them. So you don't necessarily need to start something new. And I think a lot of maintainers will gladly share and point you to some issues that will be easy to resolve, and that's one way to actually start your journey with open source.
Yeah, there's lots of nuggets there that I wanted to parse on a little bit. There in open source in general, there's always having choice is great, but as you said, Filip, sometimes being able to enhance existing choices out there that can, take adoption to another level. So I see the balance of making sure people are aware of some of the existing packages exist to implement best practices from a UX standpoint, also from a development standpoint. I think being able to amplify those and hopefully having, maybe some best practices put out there by the community would be a great way to go here. And that's something that specific to my industry in life sciences we're trying to tackle is we're using Shiny a whole bunch of life sciences, but everybody's kind of had their own take on it, their own methodology of it. We want to kind of share some central resources about how people can get started. But I think that can generalize to a lot of other industries as well. So yeah, I really resonate with those points.
Can I ask a question, since this is a panel discussion, right? So Filip,
you got it.
And Eric too. So this has come up before, people talking about performance with Shiny, and I'm wondering if the issues that people are running into have to do with Shiny itself, adding extra overhead, or if it's just doing computation in R, or just maybe not even the computation in R has a performance issue, but just doing whatever computation at all is no matter what language you used is expensive. Like where do you see these performance issues?
I can take a quick stab at this, and certainly Filip, please chime in as well. But I think from my experience, a lot of it is having to do with getting developers of larger applications to understand that the more business logic you can try to do outside the app before you import that massive data set from, say, Postgres and AWS, the better. And being able to profile that effectively so you know where the bottlenecks are is unfortunately an area that is not natural to a lot of the typical Shiny developers. So certainly R itself has a role in this and how they're leveraging it. I have seen in my experience, sometimes the loading time itself can be a problem where we put in our browser address, say RStudio Connect or whatnot, and it's just kind of blank there for about 5-10 seconds. And then you start to see the UI kind of refresh. So that's happened in some of the larger apps that I've been consulted on or built upon. I'm sure there are other, more targeted examples. Those are the two that come to mind. But Filip, have you heard much from your clients or customers on issues with that?
Yeah. So performance is tricky because there are various reasons of apps being slow, right? So it's very rare, in my experience, that the framework is the reason. There are some cases where we were able to optimize, where the bottleneck was communication between front and back end, but this is very rare. So, for example, one Shiny app that it was actually a COVID dashboard for Doctors Without Borders. Their COVID dashboard had some communication. I think it was selectized, and we had a lot of data coming through Shiny, and then we went through an AJAX asynchronous call straight to JavaScript, and that was a great improvement. But this is just one case in 10 when something like this is needed, and I think most common cases where we have actually slow R code and we need to refactor this code. We don't need to load the whole data set into the memory, things like this. And they can already improve performance very often tenfold. So if we build best practices as a Shiny community in terms of how to build performance code, R code, I think it would be already a great improvement for Shiny apps as well.
Yeah, I think again gets to the point of putting these resources that can be discovered easily. I've had a healthy mix of colleagues who are even new to R itself, and they just don't know where to go first. There's just so much out there. And I've always been in the mindset that, yes, you can get started with Shiny quickly, but when you get to these kind of issues that we're talking about here, there is a different mindset that sometimes it's harder to adopt if you're new to it. So honestly, one of the reasons I started the Dev Series is to put focus on this transition from that beginner to expert developer skill set. And I have a ways to go personally, but certainly that is a common theme of optimizing your performance, optimizing your UI UX experience, and hopefully we just see more adoption of this in the community as a whole. Okay, so yeah, we got a lot more to cover here, but I will surface up the next one. If you could go back in time, definitely Joe and Winston, you may have fun with this. What would you implement differently in Shiny, knowing what you know now and how it's being used and some of the stories you've had from the inside in development?
I think the easy one is I think we would go from camel case to snake case, and we would reverse the order of select input would become input select. I think we made that decision probably a year or two before it would have become obvious that we should have gone the other way. And yeah, I don't see how we can ever change that, unfortunately. Yeah, I think there are a lot of things in Shiny that because we didn't add features until later, it made it a little bit more difficult to make it as smooth as we would like. So for example, the way modules work, the way you define module UI, you have to write NS around every ID. And forgetting those NSs is such a common mistake. Even if you design the module system, it's just so easy to forget. And had we had that module design in mind when we first created Shiny, I think we could have probably made that automatic. But the fact that it had to be retrofitted onto a framework that already existed made it very difficult. That being said, there's actually surprisingly little for a project that's been around for 12 years. In the beginning, I didn't even really know R very well, so there are some of the older bits of the code that were not written in idiomatic R originally. I think we've gotten away pretty clean. Like I think I have fewer regrets about the way R was designed. Shiny was designed or implemented, especially the R bits, than probably any other significant piece of software I've written in the past.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that I think that we should have done differently is to have reactive values instead of just, you can do input $X. Instead of that, just returning the value that is an object, or that's like a function that you have to invoke, so that there's this sort of common pattern in all these types of different reactive objects. Well, I guess reactive values, reactive val, reactive expressions, where you have to invoke all of them. So it's really clear that there's something happening here. It's not just, you access it and then there's this magic that happens behind the scenes. That's one thing that I think we should have done differently. And another, this is sort of a broader category. And I think that maybe we should, I don't know if we should have done it this way for sure, but there are times when I think that the UI stuff, we should have either put that in a separate package or sort of namespaced it differently so that it's easier to change to newer UI components as time goes on. Because, like the core R code in Shiny is, like all the reactive stuff, that stuff's pretty stable. And that's not changing much over time. But all the, the web framework, or like the, HTML, JavaScript, CSS stuff, that stuff is always changing. So, we started out on Bootstrap 2, and then it changed to Bootstrap 3. And that was, that was there's a little bit of pain involved in that. And now, they're up to Bootstrap 5 now, and that stuff is just gonna keep changing over time. And trying to keep up with that, when that stuff is if that stuff is in Shiny, that makes it really hard to switch to newer versions and not break people's code. And the same is true for like various types of inputs we have, like the slider input. We used a different JavaScript library at the beginning than we're using now. And if we want to change that in the future, it's harder to do that with all the existing code that sort of has expectations of those components. So if we had moved those out to a separate, I don't know if it would have been the right thing to move to a separate package or namespace it differently.
I mean, but if you think about people who are just getting started with Shiny, now you're forcing them to make another decision, right?
Exactly. Well, yeah. So that's the other
slider
side
package.
of it.
So yeah. But for sure, it's a pain for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, even this conference and well before, we've been hearing and seeing the praise for BSLib as a great way to address some easy customizations with the quote native Shiny UI. Do you see BSLib taking a bigger role in this space of extending the UI without compromising the backward compatibility of Shiny itself?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think you can overstate the amount of work that Carson put in for BSLib. I mean, the amount of behind the scenes CSS wrangling he had to do to make that not just work, but be backwards compatibility, to maintain backwards compatibility with a whole ecosystem of packages, not just Shiny, but also Flex Dashboard, our Markdown, is unbelievable. And I do think, we should be changing our tutorials to bring in BSLib as quickly as possible. I really do think that it is the way people should write apps going forward. Bringing in at least Bootstrap 4, if not 5. And I've been really surprised. I mean, part of this is really thanks to Carson's efforts, but how well it works in so many cases for especially more kind of straightforward apps that don't have a ton of customization. It's really, really pretty incredible, and people should be using it. It's a cheap way to make your stuff look at least like 2018 your CSS instead of 2012.
Yeah.
Can I say one more thing that I forgot that I think one of my biggest regrets is the function names for reactive and observe. I think those two in particular are just so unhelpful. And the fact that we called reactive a reactive expression, I just think it's confusing, and I wish that we could go back and call reactive expressions reactive calculations, and the function would be like, something with calc in it, and then observers to be called actions or effects or something like that. That it's more obvious. Observer, I was deferring to the sort of prior art in the world of reactive programming. But I think I should have had the confidence to name it something that made more sense to our users rather than something that made sense in the literature.
That's a tough one to think about, though. But I do acknowledge that when I was first getting into Shiny development, when to use reactive, when to use observe was easily the biggest stumbling block for me. Now, I still remember being there in the front row at the first ever Shiny conference when you enlightened all of us with it. And then it was like, now I see how it is. Not that I understood it perfectly. It was like, that was the closest I get. So maybe to your point earlier about the BSLib interactions, it may be just a case of updating the materials that y'all have put together so nicely on, say, the Shiny site, and making sure that people are aware of these trade-offs front and center. Because when people ask me, oh, Eric, I want to help you out with some Shiny stuff, I have no idea what's going on. I always point them to that first, and then I say, okay, let's talk after you've had a review. So this is for any software project, but having living, future-proofing documentation is certainly a big component of that.
Yeah, 100%.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, go ahead, Filip.
So I just want to say that for me, as being software engineer, actually these names like reactive and observer, they make perfect sense, and that's made me interested a lot in Shiny. I was into Meteor.js at the time, and I had this background in mathematics as well, knowing R, and this was like the best of two worlds. So yeah, I mean, from retrospective, I agree that for data scientists, probably it would be easier this way. One thing that I would love to see is, and we struggled at a certain point with that quite a lot, is a separation of the reactive engine as a separate being. So it would make it easier for us to test reactive logic and also to provide different interfaces when necessary, but mostly for tests. I think reactive engine is very deeply rooted to the web framework in Shiny. At least this was my perspective when I remember I checked Shiny sources, and it was very hard for us to find a way to separate this and use it as a separate thing.
Just out of curiosity, what would you want to use the reactive engine for outside of the web stuff?
So at the time we were thinking about this, it was mostly testing logic. So with modules being separate, it would be nice for us to make sure that every computations and even provide some mocks to modules and make sure that the logic of the module is intact. There are ways to do it right now. So I think ecosystem is more mature and we have more packages for testing stuff. But I remember 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we were actually exploring the possibilities of how to test logic, then having a separate reactive engine was something we really were looking for.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, I intended the implementation to be separate. So there are a lot of things in the reactive core functions where instead of taking a session, they take a domain, and the domain is like 100% of the time it's a session, but I wanted to reserve the right to sort of extract that out. But I think the one thing that you were probably missing is that the flush react function is not exported. And if you do export it, it all actually is drivable outside of the web framework, but we have far from ever documented that. But yeah, if that's still something that you are interested in, feel free to ping me after this and we can talk about it.
Thanks, Joe.
I love panel-driven development. No, that's fascinating. I'm already getting a lot of insights that I didn't think about even from an end user perspective. This is terrific. So that was kind of a look at the past. How about we look at the future a little bit? What is, as much as you all can reveal, what is kind of on the roadmap for Shiny in the coming years? You kind of knew this was coming, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to disappoint you. There is so much that we're working on right now, and so little of it is ready for us to talk about. I think of all of us, the only person that we could have submit a talk to this conference was Barrett, because he was the only one with something that we're allowed to talk about. It's just a weird coincidence that at this particular point in time, we have a bunch of secret, sort of not ready for public disclosure things going on. But I do want to say that it is an incredibly exciting time for our team. We have some really cool things that we can't talk about, but I'm really thrilled about what's happening on the team right now, both in terms of the project we're working on, but also the team itself has never been stronger, both because we've made some really fortuitous hires and also just people on the team being part of the team for longer and us, learning over the years to work better and better together. So I can't wait to share. And I know Winston is dying inside right now, wanting to talk about some of the stuff that he's been working on. But yeah, sorry.
Well, if it's anything like something I've been getting into, this is outside of Shiny, but something that at RStudio have released now with a lot more attention. If it's anything like the waves that Quarto is making in the realm of publishing, reproducible documents and some of the frankly amazing innovations that I've seen just in my very little time with it to make a silly slide deck that I presented yesterday. It can do so much more than that. But if it's anything like that game changing, oh yeah, I'll be in the front row for sure to see this.
You're going to want to scale your expectations. I mean, me and Winston are pretty good, but JJ at full power is, I don't know if you want to draw too many direct comparisons. Gordo's pretty unbelievable at what he's doing there. But yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we have cooking.
Well, I get, there's nothing like teasers, right? We'll just have to stay tuned for it. If I had to guess, I'll probably be hearing about this more at RStudio Conf.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but yeah. I
mean, when you all ask me to be a moderator, you know what you're getting into. So. Well, I am very excited, though. I can understand, things are still moving, but I will be very interested in that. So another kind of along the lines of this, but it's coming from a different framework, and this might sound a little controversial, so we'll get your take on it. But there has been a rise of alternative frameworks, such as Streamlit. Do you see that as a quote-unquote threat to Shiny? Any risks, or are there opportunities that is presenting that maybe for future development?
Yeah, I think Streamlit is a fascinating framework. I hope it's okay for me to say this, but like of all the reactive frameworks that have come out since Shiny, I don't even know if they refer to themselves as reactive framework, but sort of I guess, interactive data framework. I think they represent the most interesting alternative vision of the world to Shiny. The trade-offs that they're making are very different than the trade-offs that we made. And I don't think anybody at RStudio would disagree that Streamlit is easier to learn. I mean, it's not even close as far as I can tell, because everything in Streamlit executes from beginning to end. And then if you like move a slider, the whole script executes beginning to end. If you make any change, the whole script executes beginning to end. There's so little to learn as far as how to structure your server logic. That being said, I chose the trade-offs that I chose in the beginning for a reason. I think without reactive programming the way it was expressed in Shiny, I wouldn't have done this. Like I wouldn't have. I mean, I made Shiny, yes, for data scientists, but also I wanted the framework that I wanted to use. And there's a certain level of power that I just was not willing to compromise on. And I think Shiny represents a really interesting trade-off between power and ease of use and conciseness and expressiveness. And so it's been really interesting to watch this framework gain popularity when it represents such a different trade-off in terms of ease of learning versus expressiveness and power. There are a lot of Shiny apps that I cannot conceive of how you would build them in Streamlit. And I mean, that makes sense given how straightforward they were able to make their execution model. Of course, there are going to be trade-offs. So I definitely have been very impressed with the work that they've been doing. But at least at this time, it almost feels like a complementary framework to me. Like if you are doing something that's mostly about tweaking parameters for a relatively straightforward calculation, then totally. But some of the more complicated apps we've seen, I don't know how you would begin to do that with Streamlit. I don't know, Winston, do you have anything to?
No, that was great.
So maybe I'll jump in. So first of all, I think we can be happy that Python community eventually got this right, and that they have something to play with. There were several attempts before, and they were very hard to use. And I think Streamlit feels almost like writing in a notebook. So this is very similar, and I think it's not a coincidence. It is mostly used by machine learning community, and they mostly use it to play with machine learning models. So I agree with Joe that we still wait to see a big app. Like I wait to see a big app built in Streamlit, and I think they will figure this out. Like they will, but it will be different for sure. They need to figure out how to do routing. They need to figure out how to modularize the code, how to interact between different modules. So everything that's already figured out in Shiny, they need to find their answers to these questions. Also tests and stuff like that. So I think we are, as a community, we are one step ahead. And I think this might be very fruitful, and we might learn something from the Streamlit community as well. So it's good that we have both. It's good because some of the projects will be better with Streamlit. If there is a machine learning model built in Python, maybe it will be just easier to encapsulate it this way. But if I worry about something, I maybe not worry, because Shiny still has a long way to go. But I think that the biggest threat is not from the Python community, but perhaps something completely new. So I think checking on what's happening in Julia, this is perhaps something that can disrupt in the future the way we think about interactive apps. That's my take on it.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting future. I've always been trying to keep a little bit of an eye on some of the other frameworks, but hopefully it's things that can benefit all the projects for the better. Maybe a new take on a feature, a new take on a user experience that can help everybody. Like I said, choice is always good. Although I am quite biased in my choice right now, and hopefully this big future plans won't change that at all. But I'm very much I'm still very satisfied with what we have in the Shiny ecosystem. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. But I think, yeah, always keeping an eye on what's happening out there is always helpful. So, yep. And next points are, I think, some that all of us can have perspectives on. I'm going to blend a couple of these together. But Joe, you obviously mentioned that Shiny's been around for 12 years now. I can't believe it. I just cannot believe how long.
Oh, that's not right. It's 10.
It's a 10, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, either way, it's been a long time. And we have seen it become a vital part of many enterprises, many industries. Certainly from my perspective in life sciences, it has been absolutely massive. But can you talk a little bit from your perspectives how this adoption within industry has evolved? And certainly if you have thoughts about my specific industry of life sciences, I won't turn that down either.
You want to start, Winston? Or?
Well, so I was thinking about this, like, why is it big in pharma? Because I saw that in the Slido, and actually I asked Phil Bauscher, who's at RStudio, he works in the pharma space, and like, why do you think that is? And what he told me, and Eric, you can feel free to interject here and correct me if I've got any misconceptions here, but at least. So Shiny is very big in the pharmaceutical space, and it's because people there historically have used SAS quite a bit for doing their stats, and moving from SAS to R is from one statistical programming environment to another one that's a pretty it's a pretty natural transition to go to R, and so Shiny, of course, is what you'd use if you're in R. As opposed to going from SAS to Python, which is less, that's more, as I understand it, a more difficult transition. And there's not as much sort of statistical stuff available in Python. And so, because the SaaS users go to R, then they end up using Shiny, and that's one reason it's really big in the pharma space. Now, I can't say that I have great, insights about the sort of the general, like, where it's going in industry. So I don't know so Philip, you actually, you work with a lot of people that do this stuff. So maybe you have some other thoughts about that.
So I completely agree with what you, Winston, said. So Shiny is big in pharma because R is big in pharma. There is a whole ecosystem on Bioconductor dedicated to these things, and we talk to a lot of different pharmaceutical companies, like very, very big, smaller ones, and they just feel relieved. So very often our users are at the front line, like they really want to start something new and use R, not SAS, and they are pioneers when it comes to innovation. And very, very often as well, this is the most advanced language that they know. So they don't know Python very well, or they don't know JavaScript very well. So if they want to actually build something new and they have this energy to build something new, they stick to R because they have this ecosystem of packages. They know how to use it. It is ready for production. So they have everything they need to actually innovate within their organization. So I think that's why it's the tool that they have. They know how to use it, and they use it.
These are all great points. Time for a little story time of Eric here, because I do have lots of thoughts on this. It's one for a lot of statisticians and data scientists coming into pharma, the natural training that we had either in grad school or in our grad research before joining these, whether small or medium or large size companies, R has been at the forefront of doing innovative statistical methodology. Literally the stuff I've been doing in my day job, especially the last like 4 or 5 years, the methods we've been putting in production, we simply cannot do in SAS. It's just full stop, can't do it. But then when Shiny came out and I found a way, and others in my industry definitely have had similar stories, when we've had a way to expose this very complex method that, sure, we had our scripts to do it, and that's how we built it, but we can't expect our colleagues in the medical teams, regulatory teams to want to become R programmers. As much as I love people to use R for all the things, they probably won't want to do that. So having Shiny as a front end to these complex algorithms, from, say, designing a major experiment all the way to when we get our data and we're about to make a call on should this compound go forward, having the drill down interactive visualizations, getting away from people sending like 1,000-page PDF of a bunch of different tables and letting people go to one web page to learn about all these, trends in the data. That was a huge step to enhancing a lot of our internal processes. Now, we have a long ways to go. That's why there are now task force specifically to raise adoption of best practices and using Shiny in more regulatory situations. But it just lends so well to the work that we're doing from both a innovation perspective, but also understanding the data that we're collecting and making decisions off of it with, not leaving a stone unturned, so to speak, and letting us drill down to these insights very, very quickly. And many of the statisticians have been comfortable with building these. Do they start as prototypes? Yeah, most of them do. But then with the tooling that's come in the Shiny ecosystem the last few years, getting it to the production, as we've heard in this conference, is not a huge reach anymore. It's not easy, but the tooling is there to do it. So I think R has just been a natural player in this particular industry to make these happen. And I think we're on the right track. There's just more work to be done. but I'd imagine other industries are probably going to catch that similar wave in the future where they're going with it.
Yeah. Pharma's been unbelievable for us as a business, but also in terms of the community. That's the Shiny pharma community is just incredible. I remember the first R Pharma that I attended, I was taken aback at the sophistication of the apps that people were building, the add-on packages that they were writing, and the effort to which some of these companies were going to make their Shiny development experience better. I think the first time I ever heard of there being full-time Shiny developers was at one of those conferences. I think unlike a lot of other industries, the needs of pharma are so well aligned with Shiny as opposed to other ways of interactively visualizing your data. I mean, I don't think we ever have to have the conversation with pharmas about why they might want to use Shiny instead of Tableau or Power BI, right? Like it's pretty clear to them that they need something that they can do, bespoke interactivity on top of, the routines that they've written in R. And just the willingness to invest because the stakes are so high in pharma. They have the resources. They really, really want correct results. They want them quickly. And they want to be able to build exactly the experiences to get the insights that they need to. So, I mean, they've been I think just that industry has just produced so many great insights for us. You're a big part of that, Eric, obviously, but like just a lot of your colleagues in that industry. I'm again and again, I'm surprised by how much that they've been willing to invest in Shiny to really learn and understand every bit of it. And even I think in the early days, people who were so motivated that there were even a couple of sort of Shiny competitors that came up briefly in the bioconductor space because they weren't willing to wait for the capabilities that they really felt like they needed. So yeah, it's just been just a tremendously rich industry, I think, for our team to interact with.
Yeah, I still remember, that first ever R Pharma senior reaction to some of the talks that we had, and we've had some nice conversations about ways to make, custom solutions we were doing better. And one story that I'd like to, a quick anecdote is the Shiny Meta package was, I think, born directly from some of those collaborations, and that was unheard of for some of us in this early pioneering of using Shiny in this space, that we're able to work with all of you and kind of share some of these pain points we were having on reproducibility, which is so critical to the work we do. So certainly it's another testament to the open source philosophy of, getting together, speaking about a need, and coming together to find a solution. So that was one of my favorite parts of that.
Totally. And in terms of the broader enterprise adoption of Shiny, I think the tenor of our conversations as RStudio, our conversations with enterprises have changed a lot over the years. I think in the early days, if you were talking to data scientists, they were all about R, all about Shiny. But talk to any of the the people that are more on the IT side or stakeholders who had to sort of make buying decisions, and there was a lot of skepticism that we had to overcome, both about Shiny but also about R. And over the years, that's really changed, and then it became more about like how do we deploy and how do we make sure that it's secure and all these things. And these days, I'm seeing like another level of sophistication again in a lot of the conversations we're having with customers, and they're really asking us to sort of push the envelope now, especially as it regards deploying stuff into the cloud. I mean, just the movement to AWS and Azure and GCP is unbelievable. And the sort of more and more sophisticated questions they're asking about how to use RStudio products, especially when deploying Shiny apps, and how does that integrate with the more and more complicated, but also kind of homogeneous types of deployment topologies that they're using in the cloud. Those questions are like, we're having them all the time now. And we have some of our brightest engineering minds working on those problems these days.
Yeah, I'm trying to push the envelope a little bit of some of the work I'm doing of going to container technology and AWS for these larger scale situations.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time, but one that kind of reminds me of the early days of Shiny itself. We're trying to find our way a little bit. So certainly as this evolves, I'll be interested to see, yeah, kind of the learnings that you all have from your side and how we can make that better.
Yeah.
Yep. And Filip, do you want to jump in with your thoughts?
Just another thought that I had is that hopefully, and I think this is true, but this is just more clear when we look at pharma. So in pharma, we have all these research teams, people doing preclinical trials, clinical trials, and they already proved within these organizations that R and Shiny are very, very useful. And what's happening then is that R gets adopted when it comes to manufacturing, supply chain management, and forecasting. So all the whole business, right? And I think this is just more clear in pharma, and hopefully we will see the same pattern for other large organizations where R will prove it's very useful in one domain for one team, and we know from that practice that this is happening for many organizations. But what's needed is this first good use case, which delivers adoption, ROI for the business, and will prove that R and Shiny are very, very useful. And then it's very easy to start conversations about BI, for example, because there's so much more we can do with Shiny than we can with read-only tool.
Yeah, excellent points. So it's we still got some time left. Let's have some fun with these remaining questions. This is definitely in lines of what we've been hearing about in this conference. But what are the most influential new Shiny related packages in your opinions of the last couple of years? We talked about one of them already, so you can't cheat and say VS Lib again. What else do you think of?
That is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I'll say I'm going to cheat a little bit. It's not new, but I feel like over the last couple of years, I really hear more and more about Golem. Just like left and right, it seems like it really, really resonated with people. So I don't know, like I actually would be more curious to hear what Eric and Filip have to say about this, because Winston and I just spend so much time with our heads down, focusing on hard problems that we know exist in the core that especially the last 18 months, I feel like we've been in a particularly sort of grindy heads down kind of a mode. So I would love to hear from you guys, both what's been mentioned at this conference and without, what has resonated with you guys the most.
Yeah, certainly Golem is part of a bigger picture here of setting up developers for success to go from like that prototyping stage to production. And I think, I've been an early adopter of Golem. It has literally been the backbone of 3 major, and I mean very major production apps I've done internally that I need reliability. Do they have the biggest user base? No. But when they are used, they got to be perfect because they're used in a big, high decision stake meeting with stakeholders. So being able to take the best practices and make it as easy as possible for me to bootstrap those is a huge feature. And I think Golem is not the only solution in this now. We've been hearing about Rhino, of course, in this conference. There are others that I think are in this space of giving you that kind of use this or dev tools like framework to get yourself up and running quickly and eliminate the friction of manual effort, even with bootstrapping a module or bootstrapping tests right away. So I'd say that is a system that's kind of rising up above the ranks, I would say, in the last couple of years, is just setting up for development success when you want to go from that transition of just doing something quickly like a whiteboard thing all the way to getting production. But certainly, Filip, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
So first, I think I agree with Golem. I think there is a need that people have to establish some good practices that are not within core Shiny, and that will make it easier for them to transition between projects, get onboarded to projects when they join some team, and also how they help them learn as they go. And I think both Golem and Rhino try to establish a system like this for people. So this is why we had some tools internally and some good practices we've used, and now we decided it's time that we are ready to share them. So that's one part. The other part I am excited about are the ways we can leverage other existing ecosystems within Shiny. And one that's particularly interesting for us at Appsilon is React ecosystem. So there is a huge ecosystem of JavaScript, well-tested components that can be used. And there is a React R package, and we created our Shiny React package, shiny.react package, that helps wrap this existing code in JS and use this completely natively from Shiny. So no JavaScript knowledge is needed once you have such component, and you can build very, very quickly very complex new things in Shiny. So that's what I am excited about. So how do we leverage, and what should we leverage from the tens of hundreds existing React components?
Yeah, that's quite interesting, and again, I'm very thrilled to have choice in this field too, from the development perspective. These different approaches like Golem and Rhino, there is kind of a decision point that as a developer you kind of have to make is, do I go full bore into an R package route, or do I kind of go somewhere in the middle, somewhat like what Rhino is doing? So that's, I think, a debate that maybe not so much a debate. It's a question that I think is probably going to get talked about more. I see both sides of it, and I don't think it's necessarily one's better than the other. I think they're just slightly different philosophies. When I work with collaborators that have pretty good expertise in the R packaging framework, they love the Golem framework, and then there are others that are still trying to get better with their Shiny skill set. That's where maybe the package route's a little too intimidating for them. Maybe he's still getting some of the best practices, and Rhino might be the sweet spot in some of those projects. So I think that's an interesting area that I think we're going to see some discussion on as we go forward, for sure. Good. Well, we have a few minutes left. There's one I wanted to surface, is that it's a total credit to obviously Joe and Winston, you on the Shiny team, that it's remained remarkably stable despite continually evolving and improving over these years. How do you maintain this balance, and what makes this easier or hard for both of you?
That's so how do you maintain the balance? I think we're very aware that there's a lot of users that have built shiny applications, and there's this whole like momentum of existing Shiny applications out there that we have to be very careful when we make changes to not break them, or if we do make some sort of API changes, that we do it gradually and have a long sort of deprecation cycle for things, and that's we have also like a lot of extensive internal testing. So we have, I don't know, about 100, somewhere between 100 and 150 applications that we test every single night automatically, and we have like an automated dashboards with all the results that displays all the results, and that's something that helps us avoid breaking changes. So that's how we keep the backward compatibility. As for adding new features without breaking things. I mean, hopefully most of the things we add are not gonna change the behavior of any existing code. And I think that's true of most of the stuff that we've done recently. As I mentioned before, though, making changes to UI components is difficult, and so and that's one reason that BSLib is a separate package. So hopefully people will be able to opt into those sorts of changes where things could break.
Yeah, that's right. I think we really protect the core. So if we have ideas that we are not 100% we're going to want to live with for the rest of our lives, we don't put them in core. So Shiny Validate was one where I feel like it's a pretty fundamental feature of Shiny to have input validation. But just because I felt like there's only like a 90% chance this is the right API, we made it a separate package. I also think the way that Shiny itself is built, we're just really careful when adding features to try to keep them easy to reason about. So features that kind of cut across a lot of areas of the source code, that's kind of a code smell that we worry about. So features that drop in and feel sort of independent from or orthogonal to the other parts of the framework. Those are the ones that we like better. So, but yeah, we used to before we kind of grew up and had good CI, we had those 150 test apps, and we would run them by hand across 3 different versions of R, 5 different browsers, and just the whole team would stop what we were doing for like 2 weeks before every release, and just literally, one app at a time go through the list. Yeah, I mean,
the pain is immense just hearing this. My goodness.
Yeah, and I would,
well, it was 2 weeks if everything went well.
2 weeks, that's right. That's right. Every time you find a bug, you have to start over. Yeah. And I would just remind the team every time, this is what relevance looks like. This is what success looks like. If nobody was using Shiny, we wouldn't have to do this. But it is because of how much pain we will cause people if we break anything that we had to go through that effort. So thankfully now we don't have to worry about it doing all that stuff manually. We have it running every night.
Wow, getting flashbacks to some previous testing nightmares from my other big apps just hearing that. I'm not even a developer of Shiny itself, but well, our time has flown by, everybody, and we're going to have to close up here. But I certainly want to thank Joe, Winston, and Filip for joining this awesome discussion. Even just with this short discussion, I learned so much about things I want to take forward to my colleagues and others that are championing Shiny and life sciences and beyond. Any last words that y'all wanted to mention before we wrap up here?
I just want to say thank you to Appsilon for this awesome conference. I mean, each day is starting at 3:30 a.m. for me, so I'm waiting for the YouTube recordings. But it's been so cool to see, the chatter about the conversations on Twitter and to see the incredible lineup of speakers that you've had. Really seems like you've run a first-class conference here, and I'm really excited to watch the recordings.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for joining us. I will, together with Sam, when we will be closing, I will thank everyone. Hopefully, I will try to thank everyone because so many people were involved from the community, from our ladies, from your team, and individuals like you, Eric. So I really see this as a community effort, and it was actually an honor for us to be able to host this, and I'm looking forward to our plans for next conference. It's magnificent that we can actually talk for 3 days about Shiny. We were not ready to make this 24 hours long as
I don't
RStudio
recommend
Conf.
it. I don't recommend it.
Yeah, I felt it would be very exhausting, but maybe next time it will be more US time zone friendly.
All right, thanks. This has been a lot of fun, like just seeing the talks in the conference and then taking part in this panel. It's been a blast.
Excellent. Well, I won't delay the wrap up any longer. But again, thank you, thank you, Joe, Winston, and Filip for joining this, and certainly want to thank Appsilon on my behalf for letting me be a part of this and geeking out about Shiny for 3 days. I'll never turn that down for anything. So, thank you again, and the conference will be wrapping up in just a minute. So, thank you again. We will speak to you hopefully next year.